Now, yes. Good morning, dear student. Good morning, Professor Hugo. We are team number C, and we are so excited to share with all of you the re-establishment of English from 12,000 to 15,000. Our team group is composed by Mariana Martínez Mejía, Angel Manuel Montero Montero, Camil García, Daniela Virginia Cordero Linares, Duarte Salvador Ramírez Rodríguez, and Flor de los Santos. Let's leave Mariana to talk about the changing condition after 12,000.
Good morning. The changing condition after 1200, England lost an important part of its possession abroad. The nobility gradually relinquishes their continental estates. A feeling of rivalry developed between the two countries, accompanied by an anti-foreign movement in England and culminating in the Hundred Years' War. During the century and a half following the Norman conquest, France had been not only natural but more or less necessary to the English upper class. In the 13th and the 14th centuries, its maintenance became increasingly artificial. For a time, certain new factors helped hold its group social and officially. Next slide, please. The loss of Normandy. In 1204, King John lost Normandy, breaking England's continental ties. He married Isabel of Anglomet, angering her betrothed family, the Lusitans. They sought redress from the French King Philip, who summoned John to the court. John refused ceding his status as a king of England, but Philip declared his lands confiscated. Felix invaded and quickly gained control of Normandy, further damaging John's reputation. The loss of Normandy forced English nobles to focus on England, leading to the country's political and economic separation from France and strengthening England's nation identity. And also, Rose surrendered now, and Normandy was lost to the English crown. So far, it affected the English language, as in other respects as well, the loss of Normandy was wholly advantaged. King and nobles were now forced to look upon England as the first concerned. Next slide, please. The separation of the French and English nobility, one of the important consequences of the event you described was that it brought to a head the question of whether many of the nobility owned the alliance to England or to France. After the Norman conquest, a large number held alliance in both countries, a kind of interlocking aristocratic seat. So it might be difficult for some of the English nobility to say whether they belong more to England or to the continents. Some steps towards separation that in interest had been taken into time. Following the loss of Normandy, English and French nobles were forced to choose alliance to divide interests. Many held state in both countries, but by a decree from the French king. Nobles had to relinquish their lands on the country if they choose to remain in the other. This division was accelerated by political and social changes, culminating with the nobility prioritizing their English states. The separation reduced the use of French among English upper class as alliances to England become more defined. The reason for using French diminishes by the 1250. The English nobility largely considered themselves exclusively English. Now my partner is going to continue.
Hello, class. This is Angel Montero, and I'm going to be speaking about the French reinforcement. So, back in 1066, when the Normans took over England, it wasn't just a new king and government. So they brought their entire language with them, French. The Normans made French the language of power in England, which was a huge shift. If you wanted to be part of the elite, whether in the royal court, government, or law, you had to speak French. For the upper class, speaking French wasn't just useful, it was also a way to show you belong to high society. Meanwhile, most everyday people keep speaking English, but now English had a lower status. It was seen as the language of the common people by that time. Please, the next slide. Okay, but the Norman influence went way beyond language. French culture started spreading through England, affecting almost everything, including art, literature, and even how buildings look. Uh, French styles and tastes became the standard for what was considered high class, and English nobles and artists started copying French ideas, and soon the French way of life was seen as more refined and sophisticated. As a result, English started borrowing a lot of French words. These weren't just any words, but important ones, especially for government, as I said, law, fashion, and anything luxurious. So words like court, judge, and council, and also beauty, became part of English vocabulary. This added a new layer of meaning to English, letting it express ideas and concepts connected to power and prestige. Now, English wasn't only a practical language, it could also be elegant and expressive. Please, the next slide. Okay, so this influence didn't stop with England either. So across Europe, French became the it language for diplomacy. So high culture and education. People all over Europe wanted to learn French because it was the language of sophisticated and educated people. If you wanted to be seen as cultured and intelligent, you learn French. This wasn't just a small trend, it was a massive cultural shift that made French almost a requirement for anyone in Europe's elite circles. So, in the long run, all this left a big mark on English. With so many French words now mixing mixed in. So English became a blend of its original Anglo-Saxon roots and all these new words and all of these new words. So to be more clearer. So this combination is why we often have like different words for similar things in English, like ask, which comes from the Old English, and demand, which comes from French. So the addition of French words and ideas helped turn English into the flexible, layered language we know today. So it can be simple or sophisticated, casual or formal, all because of this unique mix of Old English and New French elements. So that's it for me. So the next classmate to continue with the other part.
Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Camille, and I'm gonna talk about English and French in the 13th century. Next slide, please. So, during this time, French, once a mother tongue of the Norman aristocracy, become more of a cultivated language used for social, business, and administrative purposes. It was no longer a native language for many of the nobility who have to become more separate from French. English, on the other hand, was gaining ground among upper classes, with its use becoming more extent, especially by the middle of the century. A key development during this period was the increasing incorporation of French words into English, as the upper classes still familiar with French began to express themselves in English. This also marked a shift in literature, with words intended for polite people being translated from French to English. By the end of the century, some children of the nobility were raised speaking English as their first language, while had to learn French as a second language. The level of fluency in French was clearly declined. Some individuals, particularly in legal contexts, struggled to write French properly, as seen in petitions and legal documents where mistakes in grammar, gender, and vocabulary were common. This suggests that French was no longer a living spoken language for many, but a formal and often imperfectly understood medium. Next slide, please. So, in the course of Monday, an encyclopedia poem was this protest against the use of French. This protest was wrote in English, French, and Latin. That was the language of the records. Next slide, please. Attempts to arrest the decline of French. At the close of 13th century, and especially in the course of the next, we see clear indications that the French language was losing its hold on England and the measures adopted to keep in use. The tendency to speak English was becoming constantly stronger, even in those two most conservative institutions, the church and the universities. There have been rules set by cathedrals to try and prevent use of English by novice and short school. Regulations were aimed at trying to preserve French, a Latin language, as dominant. Parliament in 1332 even tried to prevent the decline of French by requiring upper classes to teach their children the same. Next slide, please. Provincial character of French in England. One factor against the continued use of French in English was the circumstance that Anglo-French was not a good friend. So French in Middle Ages had four principal dialects. That was Norman, Picard in the northeast, Burgundian in the west, and the central French of Paris. Around Norman conquest, each had local prestige, and rise of Capetian kings in 13th century brought to dominance as France began to unify. French brought to England in conquest was a mix of Northern French dominated by Norman. So my partner are going to continue with the next part.
Okay, this is Daniela again. And now I'm going to talk about the 100 Years' War that was fought between England and France from the 1337 to 1453. Was driven by a territorial, political, and dynasty dispute. The active interference of France in England's effort to control Scotland led Edward III finally to put forth a claim of the French throne and to invade France. The great victory of the English at Crécy in 1346 and Poitiers 1356 feigned English patriotism to a white heat through this auspicious beginning of the struggle that was followed by the expressing period of reverses, and so to the contest was interrupted by a long period of truce. In the beginning of the reign of the Henry V, England again enjoyed a brief period of success, notably in the victory against Great Oath of the Agincourt in 1415, but the success did not continue after the John King Day, and the exploit of Joan of Arco in 1429 marked the beginning of the end. About the rise of the middle class in the Middle English period, we could say that English prestige grew as the middle class expanded. The language prominence tied to a social and economic importance. Also, the feudal dependency in decline, the shift from labor due to monetary payment, growth to the free tenant increased motivation and opportunity, highest debt, tore among the poor, causing labor shortage. The greater wealth distribution among lower classes, and about the general adoption of the 14th century. At the beginning of the 14th century, English was once more known by everyone. The most conclusive evidence of this is the direct testimony of contemporaries, so much of the polite literature of England. Here we have a polite literature of England, and where the writer acknowledged that some people who have lived at the court know French, but he is quite specific in his statement that all enjoy learning and unlearning all understand the English tongue. It is from opening line of a romance called Author and Merlin, writing no later than the year of 1325 and probably in the opening year of the century. Let's leave Duarte to continue.
Okay. Close your microphone and down, please. Close your microphone, please. And down. Okay, let's continue. English in the law courts, legal language. Before the 4th century, French was the language in legal process. In 1362, the Statute of Leading was enacted, mandating of using English legal process. That's mean in all the process, the English was used in judgment, in the courts, in every process. The French was the first language because of the English, because of the normal Congress. So, French was the language for legal process. As I was talking, in legal process, English was used in judgment. Established English as a language for judgment. People didn't know the law says against or in favor. When the people was judged, the people was just in French. So the people didn't understand what the process what the people were saying in favor or against them, because they need to prepare to defend in front of the court. So in this moment, defend their inheritance, it was difficult because they didn't understand the language of French, because the Norman Conquest was implement the French as a language. The people govern themselves without offending, because if they speak in a language they know really, they could defend their themselves and defend their inheritance and other process. So next page, please. Next slide. English and schools, educational language. After normal conquest, French became the language of instruction in school. So, The text says uh, French was becomes the language for the teacher teaching schools and institutions. That's why, as the normal conquest, the people feel more comfortable speaking in English. But because the normal conquest, they were uh, forced to speak in French, but they didn't know the language. In the 4th century, John Conrad and Richard Van Sandwich introduced English as the language of instruction in grammar school. So from this time, they start to implement the English as a language because the people, students, and the people judge and in front of the king, in front of the judgment process, they didn't know exactly what happened, and they didn't defend their legalities in the inheritance and the process because they didn't know the French. The change accelerated the adoption of English as the primary language of the people. Next slide. Increasing ignorance of French in 15th century, decreasing fluency. By the 15th century, French was becoming less common. So, because they were being adapted the English, the French become to losing the common use for the common people. Even those positions of power were more comfortable writing in English. So people were feeling more comfortable writing in English because most of the people of the community of the kingdom were talking in and understanding in English, corresponding to the conduct Latin, fitting their lack French proficiency. While this theme may have been exaggerated, it reflects the growing trend of dominance. So, the English start to grow and be stronger than French at this point. By the end of 15th century, William Caxton noted that the majority of the English population did not understand Latin or French. At the end, they understand that the people didn't understand really French because they make a lot of things to do the French as the first language, but they couldn't uh, implement that because most of the people understand most in English than another language. Thank you very much. Next person with the presentation.
Hello, good morning. As my parents' name, my name is Flor, and today I'm going to talk about French as a language of culture and fashion. So basically, I read the topic and I did a previous resume about what I understood. Okay, so let's get started. And as I already say, French was one of the language that was more spoke during some cultures in England. So French is often seen as a language of culture and fashion because of its strong connection of art, stylus, and elegance. Sorry, my baby is close to me. French has been a center of famous artists, designer, and writer for different cultures. For example, so I know that you haven't heard about Chanel, Dior, Louis Vuitton. Those are kind of art designer from French. So this set trend of people around the world that we follow nowadays. So the language itself sounds beautiful, sophisticated, which is close tied to the world of cultural luxury. Next page, please. Next. Okay, so here, as you see in the picture, so we have a picture of John Burton. And In the early 15th century, James Burton outlined 3 reasons of learning French. So I read the topic and I write it down here, what I understood about it. So he'd say that the things that he wrote that time, it was to communicate with French. He talked about that to understand the legal text. And this is for social exchange and letter between upper class, where often they writing in French. So this means that in that time, they want to speak in French in order for them to write a letter between each other, like for the upper class, sophisticated class. So basically, this passage explains why English people want to learn French in the past. John Burton lists 3 reasons. One, it was to communicate with French to understand. Let me enumerate. The first one, as I already say, to communicate with the French people, like talk to each other. The second reason was to understand law writing in French. And the last one, because the letters between the upper class were in French, and that was why they wanted to understand in order for them to read it. While the first reason is still applied today, because they're still doing that, the other 2 become less important over the time, because French then become more symbols of cultures and styles, status, especially by the 18th century. Even today, French is still seen as a language of elegance and fashion. This passage also highlight how French in English was involved from a practice language for communication, law, social exchange to symbols of culture's prestigious and elegant status. Next page, please. Okay, so let's move forward to this part, which is the use of English in writing. So I know you see a lot of letters there. I don't want to read it again. I just want to say what I understand. So see, as you can see here, so we have a flaw for French, American, United States and England. So the final step in the raising of English was in use in writing, challenge, give the dominance of Latin and French. Latin had long been the language of writing records due to the established role in scholarship, law, religion, while French was the language of education and elite in England. Elite in England. Yeah, so we have three different places. I already say United States, French, and England. Yeah, and England, especially after Norman conquest. However, by the 15th century, English began to replace both Latin and French in communication. As I already say, French was the main language spoke in England during some centuries. That's why people want to learn French. And after that, English became more spoken that time. So that means that English replaced both. That was Latin and also French. Okay, so the early English letter appear after, as I already say, after the first letter of French, then became starting English, and that was the early English letter that appears in the late 15th centuries, and by the 1420s, by the 1420s, English letter such a partisan and a star, that was the two responsible about the letter that come out that time. That was the correspondence that become more common. Similarly, English began to replace French, as I already say, in later document like wills, with notable examples from 1383 and late in the 15th century, including the wills of Harry IV, Harry V, Harry VI. And by the 14th, 15th, English had become a standard language for legal document and tower records, also guile ordinances, making its full acceptances in office and also language context. Let's move forward to the last part. Next, please. Next. Okay, so here I built this box because it was a lot, and I just highlight the most important thing about each parent. So as you can see here, so the Middle English literature is split out in 4 different periods. So we have here the first one, early Middle English period, that was in this year. As you can see here, so we have English language associated with the middle and lower classes. As you can see, as you can hear here, it's like French use. The French was used by upper classes. That was why the French is like lecture and sophisticated. Literature, larger religion or monetary. Popular oral literature circulate among the people, but few trends survive. Taxation of period, that was 1215s and 1315s. So that in this period, the separation from French influence.
1 minute to finish.
That was English.
Over.
Sorry.
Time is almost over.
Okay.
1
Yeah.
minute.
Okay. Almost done. Almost done. As you can see here, I just highlight the topic, the best part of the topic. English narrative, increased shift to English by the 1215. Number 3, period of grace in individual writings. So here, so they change. Is like full adopter of English class. Is like they adopt English instead of French. And here we can see some different authors from this epoch, and also diverse literature form, including narrative, allegory, and religion poetry. And the last one, 15 searches, the imitative and translation period. Literature carry the legacy charity in the Renaissance. English solidified as the dominant literature language. As you can read